Our speaker for our general session today is Judge Peggy Walker. She is a juvenile court judge in Douglas County and has served full-time since 1998. She graduated from Georgia State University with a master's degree in education and a Juris Doctorate of Law. She served as the president of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges in 2015. She represents the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges on Striving to Reduce Youth Violence Everywhere Action Council, a national effort to end youth violence. She is a graduate Harris Fellow of 0 to 3 class of 2005 and was a senior fellow at Emory University in 2008. She served as chair of the Georgia Commission on Family Violence for 2 years and served 6 years on the commission leading the effort to draft a state plan to end domestic violence. She received the Commissioner's Gender Justice Award in 2015, a Big Voice for Children Award from Voices for Children in 2016, and Emory University's Award for Unsung Devotion for the Most in Need in 2016. And I would just say, most importantly, she is a graduate of Georgia College as well. Please join me in welcoming Judge Peggy Walker.
Good morning. I am going to most likely roam around because being still is what I have to do every day, and dressed in black is what I have to do every day, so hence color and movement. All right, they asked me to come up today with what is called an action plan, but I want to tell you that anytime I get a call from Ariane or from Latanya, from Georgia College, no matter where I get that call from, or Amy, if you say, we're going to write a plan, I'm like, I'm not writing another plan unless there's a section on implementation. Because we have to do more than plan, we have to implement. And I want to talk to you about things that are pressing, things that we need to be talking about, and things that we need to be doing. The first thing that I'm going to talk to you about in my action plan, because this is absolutely number one for many, many reasons. And the number one thing is to cultivate leadership. So let's see if I can switch microphones. All right, in cultivating leadership, I want you to think for a minute about who I am and where I come from, because you would not anticipate me being here now in a leadership position designing a plan for our future in the state of Georgia. I came from the poorest county in West Virginia, McDowell County. I was a coal miner's granddaughter. He had 5 children, 4 boys, 1 girl. The boys, they became men at 18. They were on their own. They got their education by going to the military. But his daughter was not going to marry a coal miner, and she wasn't going to live in McDowell County, and he sent her to college. She was the first person in our family to graduate from college and then to earn a master's degree at Georgia State. She did not return to McDowell County except for a few short years. She came to the city of Atlanta, and she became a public school teacher in the inner city. And she believed that the best teachers needed to be in the worst schools, because her belief was that if she could teach a child to read, she could open the door for them leaving that inner city neighborhood. And she was right. And I also learned a new word yesterday. She was a phonologist. Every summer, I had to do phonics, and I could not do anything fun until I finished my phonics. And my brother and sister had to finish phonics. And I'm the overachiever. Mine was done the first week. But they would just drag it out, and I'd be like, get this done. I'm living in Oakland City Park. There's a swimming pool. There's a playground. I have a bicycle. Get it done. So not only did I learn my phonics, I would also teach my brother and sister to hasten this process. But it gave me a love of learning. It also gave me the ability to teach and to be able to reach others and encourage them to love learning the way that I love learning. So as I went to school, I was a terrible, terrible speaker. I was scared to death. But my teachers took the time to make suggestions to me on what I could do to improve that. My teachers were able to recognize what my talents were, what my skills were, to offer me guidance, to offer me support, to offer me encouragement, and to achieve things that I would have never dreamed possible. Because not only did I come from a very poor background, but I also came from a single parent with 3 children on her own in the 60s when there were not single parents. And to have people treat my mother the way she was treated, that she wasn't bright enough to buy a car or buy a house because she was a woman on her own, that certainly changed the way that I looked at things. I was determined that those multi-pages long things that they were handing to her called contracts, I was going to be able to read and understand that stuff. I became a lawyer. And it has served me very well, but with a background of education first, where I came to this campus 48 years ago and got my political science degree, my degree in education. I became a high school teacher. And I was facing children that didn't want to be in school, that didn't want to learn, and I thought, you are missing such a wonderful part of your life. What can I do to make you love learning? My talents were dealing with the children with disabilities, whether it was hearing. I could learn to sign as fast as I could talk, and I could talk fast. I worked with children who were blind, who all their materials had to be in Braille. I worked with children with behavior disorders, and they were the most fascinating of all. They could learn, they were intelligent, but they couldn't perform. And I could not understand why they didn't love learning and why, instead of learning, they were misbehaving. And the light dawned on me in those 7 years that if you can't read and if you can't write, you don't want to be labeled as dumb. You don't want to be labeled as stupid. So be the class clown. Be the one that gets put out of class, and then you've got an excuse why you don't have good grades. And it was an eye-opener for me. And once I understood why they were behaving the way they were, then I knew how to approach them and get them to learn. My biggest class was my lunch class, and in those days, class ratios were pretty high. On my good days, I had 32 kids in class. On my bad days, I had 36 kids in class, and I had them for 2 hours because it was the lunch hour. And I left teaching in December that year because I went out for maternity leave, and they called me and they said, we don't understand. We can't control your class. They divided up my class into 4 parts among 4 different people because nobody could control them. And they're like, we don't understand what it is you do. And my answer is engagement. These are not students to me. These are people. These are individual persons. I know where they live. I know who's in their family. I know what they like. I talk to them about personal things in their life, and I engage and I support them. One of the worst things that happened during those teaching years was with a 16-year-old girl. Her mother died suddenly. And then her senior year, her father died by suicide. And then her brother was killed in a car accident. And so I became a part of her support system because she wanted to go to nursing school. And I made sure that for her birthday, she had somebody that was going to celebrate. I made sure that she had somebody that was going to be present for her for Christmas, that somebody was going to make sure that someone was at her graduations and the things where she received awards. She graduated from nursing school. She's a nursing supervisor in Gwinnett County, and she has a wonderful, healthy family. So cultivating leadership means that we start with the children that we serve. But we also have to cultivate leadership among those that we work with. And leadership in every field is vital if we're going to make change and if we're going to be effective at that change. And so I want to introduce to you a judge from the Augusta Circuit. This is Amanda Heath. Amanda, I would like for you to stand. Thank you. I'm in this position today, but tomorrow, people like Amanda Heath, Carolyn Altman, Michelle Harrison, Juliet Scales, other judges that I've worked with, will be able to stand in this position and know what I know and be able to do what I do, because I have an obligation for a plan of succession. The knowledge and the skills that we have to be imparted to the next generation of leaders, and it's our job to cultivate them, and it's our job to bring them along. And I'm so glad that Governor Deal and Mrs. Deal spoke to you about the election. Who serves matters. Our children don't get to vote. Our children don't get to say what they need. And it's our job to know the educational platforms of our local candidates, our local school board, our local representatives, and our candidates for state and national office. Because if we don't put people in that care, we will not get the support we need to do our jobs. So please, please, whatever you do your research, do your voting, and after someone is in office, communicate with them. I am so shocked how few people actually talk to their local, state, and national representatives. I make it a point to invite officials to my courtroom to see the work that I'm doing, to understand the problems that I have. And I was very fortunate. Senator Perdue recently sent a staff member to spend the morning with me. And since then, the feedback and the questions and the involvement have been tremendous, because he's like, I don't understand. Help me understand this. Help me understand that. Tell me where this money comes from. Because large amounts of federal money come down at the state level, then from the state level to the local level, and you have to understand the policies, you have to understand the mechanisms, you have to understand the purposes. Because if we're going to serve our children, we have to follow the money. So while we're talking about cultivating leadership, I want to recognize we have two very important people here. We have people here from the Office of Planning and Budget. Would y'all please stand up? Thank you. It is important that our leaders be tied to our budget, because the decisions that are made about the budget drive what we can and what we cannot do. And it also, if we write a plan, but we don't have money to implement the plan, then it's like the 20 years of plans that I've written that get put on the shelf. And that's not how we need to be doing business. We can't waste resources planning and not doing. So I'm going to talk to you more and more as we go along about how to bring the budget people into your world and how to make sure that they understand what you're doing. And this includes your school board members, this includes your local commissioners, this includes your state representatives, and it also includes your national House of Representatives and your senators. They need to understand how you're using the money, what you have, what you don't have, and what comes next. Now, I did this the old-fashioned way. They asked me about a PowerPoint. And that's great, but how are you going to write an action plan when you don't know who your audience is and when you don't know what they've covered? So I decided the best thing that I could do was just like in college. You know, when your paper's due and you go like, wow, it's time to get this done. Well, I had lots of ideas and I had lots of notes about what I wanted to talk about, but putting it together, of course, last night, pencil and paper, just like when I was in here in school. But at any rate, it's extremely important for us to cultivate leadership, and I can't emphasize to you how important it is at every single level that we cultivate leadership. Now, why did I say Office of Planning and Budget? Your strategic planning for the state is housed in the Office of Planning and Budget. And one of the things that's frustrating about education, one of the things that's frustrating about child welfare, about juvenile justice, is that every time we change administrations with a new governor, every time we change with the head of an executive branch position like public health and like the Department of Juvenile Justice, the Department of Human Resources, then it's an ability to change the agenda. And when you change the agenda and you change the direction, but you don't have long periods of time in which to do it, we spend a lot of time building relationships, but we spend very little time really doing and affecting change. So my second point is embrace the science. If we embrace the science around the work that we do, and we base our strategic plans upon the science, it won't matter as much who's in charge. Now, the emphasis within that framework may change somewhat, as the deals were very, very committed to literacy. But it is extremely important for us to base our work and to propose what we do based upon the science of what works. Now, I always ask this question, and I get mixed reactions depending on the audience, but I expect I know the response in this audience. How many of you are familiar with the ACEs study? Good. Good. That's better than a lot of times. But I want to talk about it because it is fundamental to everything that we do. A number of years ago, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente decided to do a study. And they wanted to look at what was the best predictor for health problems, for issues around substance abuse, mental illness, chronic diseases. And what do you think their hypothesis was? What do you think that they were thinking they were going to find, and what did they find? I know we've got some scholars on the ACEs study because our number one person in the state here on the ACEs is here. So what did they find? Tell me about ACEs. This was people who were 50 years old, they were employed, they had insurance. Louder. And what is an ACEs score? The higher your chronic illnesses, the higher your ACEs score. Adverse childhood experience study. The more events you had in your life that were adverse, the higher the risk for diabetes, cancer, mental illness, substance abuse, depression. We have a public health crisis. We know that to have healthy, educated, successful people as adults, they have to have safe childhoods. So why are we not talking about reduction of childhood abuse and neglect as fundamental to learning? We know the science, but it's time to apply the science. And just to make this easier, I'll move it up so that I don't have to walk so far. so that I can remember key points. I'm very excited that we are national leaders in early learning, because early learning is a way of building resiliency in children. If you have an adverse childhood, what you want to do is to give children the opportunity to recover from that adverse childhood by promoting resiliency. So we know what protective factors are, and we know what risk factors are. So our job is to reduce the risk factors and to enhance the protective factors. And the most important thing in terms of protective factors is a nurturing, loving relationship. Thank you for your still face videos. There is nothing that brings it home about how important it is to have nurturing than seeing that baby suffer. And to me, that is the longest 2 minutes in video history, because I can hardly stand to watch that baby say, "Where did you go, mama?" But the mamas that I deal with every day are that flat. They are using drugs and alcohol. They have serious problems with depression. They are in domestic violence relationships where they're told that if they even look at that baby, they're going to get hit one more time. And some of them don't have as many challenges, but they are stuck in front of that phone, and that baby sees mama and the phone and no interaction. They don't know how important that give and take that you see in those videos is to the development of that child. So, what are we doing to support first relationships? And how are we using that information? I'm sure that many of you are dealing with parents who have younger children than the children that you serve. Are you educating them on what's available for those younger children? Are you linking them to the services that are available for those younger children? How many of you know what Part C services are? Oh, we're in trouble. Okay. You see my problem here? I have one hand. Let me introduce to you, LaTanya, would you tell them who you are, please? Asmani.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Latoya Asmani, and I work at the Georgia Department of Public Health. I am the new division director for health promotion, which has all of the maternal and child health programs to include Babies Can't Wait, or Part C of Georgia, and of course the Women, Infants, and Children program, WIC. Very glad to be here. Thank you.
My point is public health is your partner in getting the educational foundation laid for our children. Because every child who's experienced abuse and neglect is to be referred to public health for screening to see if they are eligible for Part C services. We know that children who experience abuse and neglect will have 4 to 5 times greater rates of developmental delays, of cognitive issues, and we know that the vast majority of them will be entitled to services. So it becomes our job in laying the foundation for early education to make sure, as Mr. Ralph Smith said, access to services. So our young parents need to know your children can be evaluated for these Part C services to address developmental delays and get them off to the best start possible. Then we want to be able to transition our children to the Part B services. How many of you know what Part B services are? Okay, now we have to do better than this, guys. One hand is not going to cut it with me. Okay, 2 hands, thank you. 3, okay. All right, one of you tell them, what is our Part B services? Thank you. Under our set of guidelines and federal laws and funding, When a child reaches 30 months of age, we begin the transition to your LEA, that's your local education agency. And one of the things y'all can do for us at the state level is it would be helpful if they all had the same name. Because it's very frustrating, because in Douglas County I say, get your LEAP application filled out. But in Carroll County it's called something different. And my children aren't all placed in Douglas County. So I have to say, who is your LEA? And they say, we don't know what you're talking about. We don't know what an LEA is. So our terminology becomes a barrier. So we need some common language, and we certainly need to make sure that we know how to smoothly transition our children. Because if we never have breaks in services, then our children will be better ready to learn, and they're much more likely to become literate and be successful in school if we have given them those early foundations. Another thing that I want to talk to you about as part of our action plan is our children who most need the Part C, the Part B services, the early Head Start, and the Head Start are the least likely to use the services. So how do we overcome resistance? How do we incentivize our families to want to engage in this early learning? Because you're asking them to get up. You're asking them to use efforts for transportation. You're asking them to be able to provide the appropriate clothing and supplies to go to school at a young age when it's not mandatory. So we're going to have to figure out ways that we can sell our product and that we can gain engagement. And that is a big part of this planning process, is reaching those who have the greatest need. And it's very, very important that we do that. And then I want to talk about something that is within Commissioner Jacobs' realm, which is the CAPS. And this is the payment for child care. And of course, we're really very fortunate in Georgia because we are doing quality care ratings. And we're beginning to build a system where we're going to be incentivizing the use of the higher level systems. The more stars you have, the less your copay. Incentivize. I mean, that is a great way to get people to look for the best quality sites that they can find. But we need to get the message out about quality care ratings, about what it means to have 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, and why it's important to have that quality care. We are using science, and when I say embrace the science, we're using science for predictive analytics. So far in child welfare, we have one that stands out. So I'm going to ask you what you think this would demonstrate. If you have a young mother who's working, who is using for her child care provider a boyfriend, the boyfriend is not the father of the child, and there is a history of family violence between the two of them, what does that equal? Louder. Abuse and neglect, but it's more serious than abuse and neglect. What else? Keep in mind in my introduction, Vice Chair of Child Fatality Review. It equals serious injury and death. So part of our job is making sure that our young working parents know how to apply for CAPS. This is so incredibly important. And we have to address the system so there's not long delays, because I don't know how many deaths I've reviewed while they were waiting for CAPS. So we've got to do better in supporting our young, single, working parents. Now, this one is a true story. I had a mother who was a truck driver, and she went on overnight trips, and she recruited her child care from the homeless shelter. And you can imagine why we got to meet each other, because her child care provider was using the money for alcohol and drugs and not feeding the children, and they went to school hungry. and our educators made the referral. So we've got to support single working parents and help them find appropriate and safe childcare because it's that important. Our parents need support, they need encouragement, and I'm hoping to be able to wrap this thing up where there's actually going to be time for y'all to ask some questions. And I hope someone will talk about something that I heard of yesterday, but I'm not versed on to speak, and it's called parent universities. I'm not a big believer in parenting classes. Anybody can go and get a piece of paper and say that they've graduated from a parenting class. What I'm in favor of is parenting instruction, and I prefer that be done in the home because the therapist can go into the home and determine what needs to be addressed. They can provide the skills to that parent, and then they can observe whether they have the ability to do that or not do that. So I think that we have to change the way we do parent instruction. Talking to people doesn't teach them how to parent. The third point I want to make is that we have to build on existing resources. And I want to talk about an existing resource that is very important for you to know. How many of you attend Family Connections meetings in the state? Raise your hand. Awesome! That is terrific. All right, how many of you work for Family Connections? Please stand up. Awesome. Tell us your name and what you do.
Hello, my name is Teresa Carter. I'm the Executive Director of Communities and Schools of Burke County Family Connection.
I'm thrilled.
Hi, I'm Vicki Nickel. I'm the Executive Director for Monroe County Family Connection.
Janet Sheldon, Colquitt County Family Connection.
Rhonda Ewer, Polk Family Connection.
Joel Rogers, Telfair County Family Connection.
Stephen Sains, Camden County Family Connection.
And I can't tell you, thank you, y'all can be seated. I can't tell you how important it is to have a vibrant Family Connections collaborative in your community, because this is where you can go to plan for your community. This is where you can go to know where your community resources are. This is where you can go to identify your gaps, and this is where you can go to plan what needs to happen next to fill those gaps and to better serve our families. What I've asked our state to think about is in the realm of child fatality review, we are required to make recommendations for prevention. Why shouldn't those recommendations come back to Family Connections to go into the Family Connection plans? Why isn't Family Connections a vital part of our prevention of serious injuries, our prevention of child deaths? It only makes sense to take the knowledge that we have gleaned from all over the state, to write out what needs to be done, and then to give it to those who do the grassroots work. But to have it come through the people who have in their budget the job of the prevention work. So we have a lot that we can and that we should do, and Family Connections is a vital partner. How many of you have heard of a state of hope? Okay, great. What is the state of hope? State of hope. Anybody? It is the rebranding efforts of the Department of Family and Children's Services. What can we do that support our families? What do we do that supports our state that creates a state of hope? Because when you talk about child welfare, what people generally sense is hopelessness. And that is the opposite of what we want to convey. What we want to convey is how do we build a state of hope? And we're beginning to do that with communities of hope. How many of you live in the Northwest Georgia where there are the communities of hope? Yay, Polk County! And what Polk County does is through their Family Connections collaboratives, they work together to address what their community needs to reduce the abuse and neglect and to serve the mental health needs of our children and to reduce delinquency, because we're looking at wellness, we're looking at success as a whole as part of a community of hope, and we have very specific projects to our communities. I think that one of the ones I would encourage you to look at is the center that is in Floyd County, where they have a one-stop shop. In Douglas County, our specific community of hope revolves around having medical care in our schools, having mental health clinics in our schools. So each community has the ability to shape what works for them. In Carroll County, there's an early learning collaborative. So I think that's a way to build on what you already have. I think that it's important for you to take advantage of Ariane's Get Georgia Reading campaign. I was very excited and hope at some point today you're going to talk about something called wraparound, because that is, again, taking what we already have and enhancing it and building on it. It's important to look at your after-school programs. If you really want to make a difference in education, that is the perfect place to work with children on what their needs are in terms of education. I would also tell you that it's important for you to look at your boys and girls clubs. In my community, the literacy rate, the graduation rate, the college rate for the Boys and Girls Club would put me out of business if every at-risk child went there. They would not need me full-time. So how can we support satellites in our schools? How can we support satellites in our churches? Because they have a program that works. Also, I would tell you that it's important to have the information about domestic violence resources, because our families need to know where they can go to be safe, how they can access the legal system, what are their support services around leaving and separation, and then what are the services in terms of group support for the victims of domestic violence, and what are the family violence intervention programs to address the perpetrators. If you don't use and have that information, you need that information, because it's vital to the safety and to the well-being of our children. And then you've heard a lot about books, the First Foundation, Reading Railroad. All of these are resources that you can bring into your local community. We've been truly blessed in Douglas County. Not only do we have the First Foundation to be able to give books to children up to age 5, monthly books mailed to them, but we also have the Junior League. We also have the Rotary Club. They're all committed to literacy, and they all make donations to our reading room. And every child that comes to our court leaves with a book. The next point that I want to make is to be not just trauma-informed, but to be trauma-responsive. Because we spent years educating about trauma, but now that we know, what is it that we're supposed to do? And I can tell you that it has changed the way that I do business every single day, because I now understand when someone comes into my courtroom and presents that I have no idea what happened to them the hour before, the night before, the year before, when they were small, when they first were in relationships. And it was a hard lesson to learn, and I learned it by listening to their stories when they move from one phase to another in drug court, and they have to tell their life story. And it is gut-wrenching. If you hear the physical abuse and the sexual abuse, it just absolutely stops you dead in your tracks. Because you think, how do you get up every morning? No wonder you've used drugs. No wonder you have issues with depression. How could we not have served you? How could we not have protected you? How could we not have met your needs? So I am a more compassionate, I am more kind, I'm more supporting, I'm more engaging, and I'm more about building relationships now, because I need to know the rest of the story. Our children and our adults will not tell you that they live in domestic violence. So you ask them, are you the victim of abuse? Do you get hit? It's always no. So how you ask the question matters. So I ask them, are you safe? Where are you safe? What makes you safe? What makes you feel unsafe? What can we do to make you safe? Because that opens up the door for conversation. And they may eventually tell you about the domestic violence, but they're not going to tell you about the sexual assault. It's not until you've built more trust and you've known them longer before they tell you the rest of the story. 2/3 of those that experience domestic violence are going to have been sexually assaulted. But there's shame, there's denial, and that is very, very difficult to tell. Because once you've opened up those doors, all of that hurt, all of that emotion, all of that effort that you've made to separate and get away from that is right there on you. And you talk about post-traumatic stress, that's post-traumatic stress. And a lot of what we do re-triggers. So we have to be thoughtful about how we handle our children, and we have to be very thoughtful about how we handle our adults. I want you to think about in your action planning and being trauma responsive about something they're doing in West Virginia, and they're talking about making it a federal plan. And it's called Handle with Care. And what it means is we live in a society with great technology now. So what that means is that you can send an email to the school and say, this child today needs to be handled with care. And what that means is that law enforcement went to that house last night. They may have arrested somebody. They may have gone out for a domestic violence call. They may have had to do a welfare check. It may mean that the EMTs went out and somebody overdosed. You would not believe the number of children who have witnessed their parents overdose in their presence. It may mean that immigration went out, took somebody out of the house. But it alerts the school that something traumatic happened and that we should be prepared for the behaviors that come from that. We know without a doubt that the more stress you live under, the more cortisol you have, the more it changes your brain, the more it changes your body, and the younger you are, the worse the effects. So our children don't have language, and their behavior becomes their language. And I spent the first 20 years of my work trying to change behaviors without understanding where it comes from. And we were miserably failing at everything because we weren't trauma responsive. So go beyond being trauma informed, be trauma responsive, and understand that the behavior of the adults, the behavior of the children is telling you something you need to know, and you have to know the backstory to be effective in the delivery of what you do. Also, as we're being trauma responsive, we have a great opportunity in Georgia, and I'm very proud to be a leader in this particular area. We are a quality improvement site for the delivery of services to infants and toddlers who are exposed to neonatal abstinence syndrome. And I have a number of partners in the room here who helped me do the letters and do the support and get that grant. But this is an opportunity for us to break down our systems and figure out how to get pregnant women to go to their medical care, how to get pregnant women to go into substance abuse treatment, how to get those babies born with the least amount of things in their system humanly possible so that perhaps there won't have to be a referral for this being a child affected by substance use. When the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act of 2016 was passed, they took out the word illegal substances. A child born with substances gets reported. It doesn't have to be illegal anymore. And that's opened up the floodgates because a lot of our population thinks that smoking marijuana is fine because it's been decriminalized in several places. But it's not legal in Georgia. It's not legal in the United States. And it's a mandatory report at birth. So we want to figure out between public health, child welfare, and the courts how to serve these children to make sure their needs are met, but not how to pull them into the legal system and lead to removal to foster care if we've got good family functioning. So we've got a lot of work to do. Yes. That's a really good question. Under the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, it is supposed to be universal screening. Some hospitals are doing universal screenings, but not all. But as this moves forward, the push is universal screenings at birth, universal screenings during pregnancy. And so we have a tremendous amount of work to do in this area. My next point is to prepare for 2 crises that you are going to face. And part of my work as a leader is to tell you where we are, but it's also to tell you where we're going and what we've got to address. Number 1, we have to address the issues of homelessness. The market for housing is contracting and the need is expanding. Our wages are not keeping up with what it costs, so we're seeing a whole lot more congregate living, and we're seeing a whole lot more families that are simply popping from place to place to place just to have somewhere to stay because there is not a solution. I was so glad to be here when Malcolm Mitchell spoke. If you're not partners with Habitat for Humanity, you need to be. If you haven't done a Habitat build, you need to do that. It is a life-changing experience. It's a way for poor families to have adequate, wonderful, reasonable housing. And if you don't have a homeless liaison working with you, you must have that. It is going to become increasingly important. And we also need to think about how we serve our chronically homeless children, because they're not getting what they need. We don't do a good job of transitioning them from school to school. We don't do a good job of building supports around them, knowing that they have greater needs. We don't do a good job of transitioning them to the next school, and we don't do a good job of supporting the family. It's very hard to concentrate on your child's education if you don't know where you're going to put your head, if you don't know where your next meal's coming from. Yes? Yes. And your point is correct, because they're so afraid of letting anybody know their secret, whether their secret is sexual abuse, physical abuse, or homelessness, because we haven't built a system of trust. We haven't built a system where they believe that they will be supported. We haven't built a system where they believe they will be heard. And so as a result, they're reluctant to seek services, because somebody's going to come in and they really think that I go out at night and look for people to remove their children. I do not. I never have. I never will. I look for ways to build supports around families to avoid removal to foster care. But we have to address our issues around homelessness, and it's very important that we do it quickly, because this is going to be something that you're going to see repeatedly that has to be dealt with. Some of the things that I've seen around the country, and the great thing about my work is that having been a state leader, having been a national leader, I have the opportunity to do a lot of teaching, a lot of training. I just came last week from doing the Child Abuse and Neglect Institute in Reno, Nevada, so I get to hear what other communities are doing. Food pantries, that's a way that we're serving some of our populations through the schools. Laundry facilities. If you've got children that are coming to school in dirty clothes, they need the opportunity to be able to wash the clothes somewhere. Having your Office of Self-Sufficiency, your food stamps, Medicaid people actually come on site to be able to assist your families. Having medical clinics, dental clinics, mental health clinics in our high schools and middle schools. We even bring probation officers in and have them on site. Making sure that we make some changes with Medicaid. And this is a really important issue. The way you renew Medicaid is they send a letter out. Well, guess what happens? Nobody stays in the same place for very long anymore. I have one school in my county where the class they start with in August will not be the class at the end of May. Every single child will have changed in that class of 22. That's how much transience we have now. So it's very important for us to change our Medicaid delivery system, where we're using things like text messaging, emails for renewals, because there's long periods of time where our children are not getting the benefits that they're entitled to because they haven't filled out the right forms. And it is handicapping the delivery of services to those families. I think it's important for you to look at using your local community sites for GED programs. Many of our parents need that. And if their parents are embracing education, then it's easier to get the children to embrace education. It is very important to have the English as a second language classes in our schools and our communities, because again, this is a way of engaging and getting the parents in a better situation. And I want you to think about doing things that are family fun. I don't think there's anything better at the elementary school level than Fall Festival and Field Day, but what can we do that involves the whole family? And can't we quarterly do something? Because we're forgetting how to play. We're forgetting how to have fun. And we're forgetting how to support families in a way that's not going to cost them money. And when we talk about access to books, it's really important to think about book exchanges. There are many people whose children outgrow their books, and they're more than willing to donate them to you to be able to be exchanged for kids that don't have those opportunities. I was pretty shocked. I'm out walking my dog, and of course you have to live where you serve, and of course everybody recognizes me, and so this grandmother stops to talk to me, and I'm thinking, I'm exercising jurisdiction over you, and you have this child in the front seat not secured in a car seat. Okay. But she was stopping to invite me to the child's birthday party. And of course I'm going to accept, because they live in my neighborhood. But I'm like, well what can I bring? Oh, why don't you bring it? I said, oh, no, I want to bring something. I said, what does your child not have? What is your grandchild's favorite book? My grandchild doesn't have any books. And I'm thinking, wow, I should have known that. I should have known that. So I just think there's lots of things that we can do. The second crisis that you have to get ready for as you're writing your action plan is the crisis in mental health. And let's start with the first thing. Mental health and mental illness are not the same thing. And we have to stop using those words interchangeably. Mental health means we have laid the foundation for our children to be healthy mentally, our adults to be healthy mentally. And in all of our work, we're either planting seeds for them to be mentally healthy, or we're planting the seeds for them to be mentally ill. And I can assure you that removal to foster care and moving children around to 26 placements is planting the seeds for mental illness. So stability of placement is an enormous issue around development of mental health for children. In Georgia, we're notorious for saying that we are not delivering services to children until they're 7 years old. But when is the first wave of brain development? When does social and emotional attachment matter? Birth to 3. So what are we doing to change that? I have preached on this for so long, I have begged on this for so long, that my local commissioners gave me the money to train child-parent psychotherapists. We are training providers to build those dyadic relationships that you saw yesterday in those videos. Their job is to do 26 sessions over 26 weeks to build and strengthen the relationship between the caregiver and the child so that that child's social and emotional needs are met. And that plants the seeds for mental health. Because if you get your needs met as a baby, you come to school ready to learn. You know how to get along with your peers. You know how to have healthy relationships. You know how to control your behaviors. Child-parent psychotherapy is not done in the home because it needs to be in a place that's neutral. So it is typically done in some type of an office setting. But it is something that we, and with the help of our partners here, we plan to continue this training throughout the state, and we plan to build workforce capacity throughout the state. And when we finish that, then we'll be looking at parent-child interaction therapy, and we will be looking at play therapy that's trauma-focused. We are going to build a workforce that will serve our children under the age of 7. I also suggest to you, and in this mental health arena, that you must address suicide prevention. Our state rates for suicide are absolutely unacceptable. Our rates for suicide under 25 are more than unacceptable. And the deaths of children 7 and 9 by suicide have to stop. We have great training programs around youth mental health first aid and other interventions that are very good to address suicide prevention, and everyone who touches the life of a child must be trained in suicide prevention. And we must be looking at our health survey data so that we know which schools to target, which communities to target, because folks, season 2 of 13 Reasons Why is coming out. And what that does is give children and adults permission to die by suicide because they see it as an option. And we must understand that we have a vital role in stopping and addressing suicide prevention in our communities. The third aspect of mental health that you have to deal with is we are facing a national change that started in the early part of my career. When I was in school here at Georgia College, Central State was a vital working part of this community. And people who were acutely mentally ill, even under the age of 12, were institutionalized. And in the 1980s, we determined that was terribly inhumane, and I will never advocate to go back to institutions. But we promised community-based mental health services, and we did not deliver. Now, we have large homeless population of the mentally ill. We have large jail populations of the mentally ill. It's extraordinarily inhumane and unacceptable in a country of our stature. It is also critically important that we understand what happens now when someone is acutely mentally ill and they give birth. Those babies are released to that parent unless that parent is actively psychotic, whether that parent has a support system or not, whether that parent is safe or not. And sometimes we don't see that child till they come to enroll in school. And then the child has bizarre behaviors in the classroom, and you bring the parent in to address those bizarre behaviors, and that parent has bizarre behaviors, and then you all contact the courts and say, what do we do? And we have to build systems of support with intensive case management. We have to have supportive housing. We have to have supportive employment, because if I remove from an acutely mentally ill parent, the chances of that child returning are very, very unlikely. Now, we're doing some great work. We have something called ACT teams to deal with the acutely mentally ill. So if you're not connected to your community services board and you're not connected with your ACT team, then you need to be. All right, what is my time? Okay. Well, again, I want to wrap up by telling you that all right, the last thing that I want you to think about is the second stage of brain development in adolescence. Because we know what the research tells us to do in that first stage, and we're doing a great job of applying the science to that first stage. But other than telling our children, don't do drugs, don't drink alcohol, we really aren't addressing that second powerful stage of brain development in adolescence. And I have adolescents who had severe abuse in those first 3 years. And they are extremely violent. They have extreme difficulties with their behaviors. They can't name their emotions. They can't speak their feelings. And my question is, if we look at things that are focused on the brain, like mindfulness, like meditation, like yoga, or things that teach internal structure like martial arts, can we use that second time of brain development to rewire that brain for them to be safe, for them to have boundaries, for them to be less violent? We don't really know what to do. And part of our action plan needs to be how to use that second stage to achieve resiliency in children. Please, whatever you do, let all of your work be built around reducing the risk factors, building the protective factors, and promoting resiliency in our children and families. If that is your action plan, then we will all have better outcomes. Thank you.